Well, good morning and welcome back to day 15 of the PartyOn Bible study. We are in this devotional, which you can get by going to christtable.today. Anybody who donates to christtable.today, I send this as a free gift to you. And if you aren't aware of what's going on over there, send yourself to that website and sign up for the email list. There are lots of things going on. In fact, I'm going to be sending out another email probably at some point tomorrow. And so if you want to make sure to get that update about what's going on, all the information about our meetings, and then actually I should be sending, as a part of that, a link to a podcast that I was a part of last week, and super excited about sending that to you because it kind of pulls the curtain back on who I am and what we're doing here, and some of my thoughts on the history of the church and the future of the church. And so it should be interesting, and hopefully anything I've said there won't get me into too much trouble. But we're very thankful for all of you who are a part of this and who join us whenever you can for this Bible study. And today we are in Genesis chapter 18. Now, last week we spent our whole week looking at the Jewish festivals and feasts. And this week we're kind of back to looking around the Bible to see what we can find about food and feasting, and how our time at the table is something that is not just meant to sustain us physically through food and eating, but is also something that I think sustains us spiritually and is God directed. And today we come to a person who to some of you will be familiar. His name is Abraham, or actually in this passage, his name's Abraham. He started with Abram and changed his name to Abraham. And so we're kind of past that point. So we're well into his life now. God has already made Abraham some very specific promises that he's going to have a family, that many people on earth eventually will look to him as their father. Growing up, we sang this song called Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. But at this point, when we come to the story, Abraham had no sons and had no daughters and no children whatsoever, and was old, the text says, and his wife was old, which essentially implies that she was beyond childbearing age. She could have been, in those days, obviously, maybe in her late 30s or 40s, and would have been considered beyond her childbearing years. She might have been likely even older than that, could have been in her 70s, 80s, 90s. We don't know precisely. There are some clues in Scripture, but all that we know is that God had made some promises, and it doesn't seem as though those have come true. And to Abraham's mind, there might have been a question mark, a huge question mark, as to whether or not those things would ever or could ever come true. And so we come to Abraham here in Genesis chapter 18, and we have a very interesting passage that talks about hospitality. So why don't we just go ahead and jump in. Verse 1, Genesis chapter 18. The Lord appeared again. So this is not an occurrence that was out of the ordinary to Abraham, God speaking to him or appearing to him. But this time he appears to him near the oak grove belonging to Mamre. One day, Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent during the hottest part of the day. This would have been normal during that time period for people to essentially take off from work or take off from anything that they were doing during the hottest part of the day and take a siesta. And so this is what Abraham is doing, is he's now back at his home tent and he's resting. He looks up from his siesta and he notices three men who are standing nearby, which would have been out of the ordinary because everybody did this. They essentially stopped during the hottest part of the day. And so Abraham, seeing this would have been a bit of a surprise for somebody to show up at the tent at this part of the day. When he saw them, he runs to meet them and welcomes them, bowing low to the ground, a sign of respect, a sign of deference to strangers, people whom he has no idea who they are. And obviously as well, a very inviting character. He runs out to meet them. He welcomes them. He bows very low to the ground. And so from the very moment this section of the scripture begins, we get this impression that Abraham is a warm inviting individual. My Lord, he says, which again, it's a lowercase l. He's not using a word here that was used for God, but he is using a word here that is used for deference or for respect of a stranger, someone who he doesn't know. This person may have been way lower, and there was kind of a status levels during this time period. This person may have been way lower than Abraham on the status rung of society, and yet Abraham still, from his position, and we believe that Abraham was quite wealthy. In fact, this passage will bear that out a little bit, but Abraham still, not knowing anything about this individual, treats them as though they are kings, as though they are the most important thing in the world at that moment. And I have to believe that they were the most important thing in Abraham's world in that moment, because of how he treats them. If it pleases you, Abraham says, if you will, stop here for a while, rest in the shade of this tree while water is brought to wash your feet. Now, what Abraham has entered into now here is a customary expression of hospitality in the ancient Near Middle East. So this is normal that Abraham would do this, or it would be common to invite them to stop, to stay here for a while if they wish to do so, to rest in the shade of this tree, being where they were. A lot of times there weren't a lot of trees or a lot of places with shade for rest. Abraham invites them to take a siesta under his tree while water is brought to wash their feet, which is both practical in order to allow them to clean themselves, but also, again, is another sign of grand hospitality, which there would have been some expectation for. And so Abraham fulfills, now we've seen, the bare minimum level of hospitality. He has invited them, over. Sometimes, today, whenever a friend maybe comes in town or passes through near where you are, it would be customary to, whether you want them to or not, to invite them over for dinner or to invite them out to a place for dinner. Whether or not they accept, you've kind of done your responsibility by inviting them to do that. But Abraham continues, and since you've honored your servant with this visit, notice that he uses the word servant to strangers and honor to strangers. Since you've honored your servant with this visit, like it's almost, if you didn't know Abraham, this is almost like super over the top. Like you've gone too far, buddy. Like nobody's believing you here. Like you're laying it on way thick. Maybe just back off the gas of hospitality just a little bit here, Abraham, because I'm maybe starting to question whether or not you really mean all of this. Let me prepare some food to refresh you before you continue on your journey. All right, they said, go ahead, do as you've said. So they accept the hospitality. Customary that they might accept the hospitality, but not rude if they don't, and continue on their way. The burden is on the host at this point to offer, but not a burden of responsibility to accept on behalf of those who are there. So Abraham runs back to the tent and he says to Sarah, who's his wife, hurry, get 3 large measures of not just flour, but it says your best flour, knead it in the dough, and let's bake some bread. Take some time to bake some bread. Now, probably you're baking it on a stone. It may be leavened. It may not be leavened. So they may not have to necessarily wait for it to rise. But they would offer some of these flat cakes as sustenance to these people. And that's really enough. That's probably more than they will have eaten on their own during that day, or as travelers, it seems, to have some warm, home-baked bread was quite a luxury. So this is meeting the need just in and of itself. But then Abraham goes further. He runs out to the herd. He chooses a tender calf and gave it to his servant, who quickly prepares it for a meal. Now, when all of this food was ready, Abraham then takes some yogurt and some milk and the roasted meat, and he serves it to the men. Now, I want to go back here for just a moment because I can go out to Longhorn just down the road here, and I do probably far more than I should, and I'm going to whip up a super nice steak. Last night we were supposed to have hamburgers for dinner. We haven't had hamburgers in a long time, but Sally went out, and Sunday night, Sunday's a big day. We'll cook hamburgers. We didn't end up eating them because someone invited us over, and it was it was so much better than eating at home alone with hamburgers. But we'll probably just eat them tonight. We have access through Publix or Kroger or whatever whatever grocery store or butcher shop is near you. We have access to meat all the time, and many of us eat some sort of meat every single day. If not, we at least have access and ability to eat meat every single day. But in the ancient Near East, that was not the custom. Now, Abraham would have had a large herd from what we know of him, so he probably could have, if he wanted to, have eaten meat every single day. But you're kind of you're eating into your profit margins quite literally when you do that, taking it out of your own stock. And so, because that's the case, your finances, your inheritance, your future is all wrapped up, and not liquid cash. It's all wrapped up in that herd. You're only going to eat the meat either when it's necessary, on rare occasion, or on special occasion. And so it would be rare even to eat meat once a week. And for a lot of people, maybe even once a month. And for some people, never, unless it was provided by somebody who had a herd and was willing to dip into the funds from the herd. And so it's not ordinary to eat meat, and it's really unordinary to serve meat unless the meal that the guests are there for are very important guests. And it would be unthinkable, really, to serve meat from your own herd that hadn't already been cut and prepared for strangers who just happen by on a journey. Abraham has nothing to prove here. They can see how wealthy he is or is not by the size of his herd, the things that he has. There's no understanding from Abraham that these are people any other than random strangers. Now we're going to see as we read through this that actually these guests are very important guests. It's either God himself or Jesus in human form, angels. These are important guests, but Abraham knows none of that, which says a lot about Abraham. So he sends the servant out to kill a young calf, which is the best meat, to quickly prepare it. Baking bread, butchering, and preparing meat. None of this is quick. But I guess he said to do it as quickly as possible. So when all of this food is now ready, quite a spread, Abraham then goes an extra step and takes some yogurt and milk alongside the roasted meat. And this was the ancient Near East. This was this is like, as we say, the icing on the cake. This is now Abraham has not just gone well above and beyond the expectations by offering and preparing meat of a tender calf along with bread. He's done the bare minimum. He's gone well beyond. And now yogurt and milk was served alongside meat at only the most incredible and important of banquets, because it was thought that yogurt and milk brought out in a beautiful way the taste of the meat. And so now at this point, we kind of have a level of hospitality here and truly love shown through food, that this is like a 5-star dining experience. In some ways, honestly, this is a once in a lifetime meal, like a wedding meal, or maybe a funerary meal that Abraham has done here for strangers in the middle of the day, the hottest part of the day. They're out working their tail to the bone to try to prepare this meal when no work typically was done. This is not a meal that would be served at this time of day, and would have taken great preparation. Abraham said, let's just do it. So he serves it to the men, and as they eat, Abraham waited on them in the shade of the trees. And so Abraham doesn't even eat. I can remember so oftentimes, growing up, whenever large family meals were happening at grandma's house, she ate last and was so waiting on other people oftentimes that she didn't even get to eat, or didn't get to eat much. And Abraham here has prepared this once in a lifetime meal for these strangers and waits on them as well. He doesn't even sit down at this point, or we don't even know if ever, to eat this food. This is not a show. If this were a show, Abraham would have been sitting there eating the meal with them. He would have been getting to know them. He would have been trying to see whether or not there was any connection that they had that he could leverage. Abraham, you know who these people are. They wine you and they dine you in order to leverage whatever you have for themselves. Instead of doing that, Abraham takes on the role of the servant. And we already know from the text that Abraham had people to do that for him. Abraham waits on them hand and foot. And so now that all this has happened, we kind of move into the reason why most people think we have this story. Verse 10, where's Sarah, your wife? The visitors asked. Well, she's inside the tent. And then one of them said, I'm going to return to you about this time next year, and your wife Sarah will have a son. We're going to stop here, but the text goes on. Essentially, Sarah overhears this and laughs, and it becomes a big thing. The strangers, why do you laugh? Well, my age. And the strangers essentially say, the joke's going to be on you. Ha, ha, ha. And this part of the text receives all of the fanfare, and we believe that this story is in here because of that. But I'm not so sure. I'm beginning to wonder, in my age and understanding of Scripture, that maybe this second half of the story is only here because of the first half of the story. I wonder if God would have ever shown up to make these promises to Sarah and Abraham unless Abraham was a very giving and hospitable person. I mean, because when you look at the relationship between God and Abraham, they had a relationship that few, if any, people seem to have, even within the pages of Scripture, where many people have a relationship, with God, as is recorded. And yet Abraham seems to go above and beyond. And I think in many ways, I'm beginning to believe that it has to be because Abraham's level of hospitality, Abraham's self-sacrifice, Abraham's willingness to, no matter who you are, treat you like a king and give well beyond what the need is or what he has to you, and then wait on you. Abraham is an extremely unique individual, not just in the ancient Near East, but also today. So what can we learn from this? Well, there are a few things, and I've already kind of hinted around some of them, but the first thing is such hospitality in the ancient Near East world would not be strange. Its absence would be strange, and it would be disturbing. Now, I've said that Abraham goes above and beyond, but there would be a certain level of hospitality that was expected. And if it weren't there, it would be odd if Abraham had not invited them to stay a while, to eat. And it would be disturbing. It would speak as much as what Abraham does in the way that he offers it, and what he offers and provides speaks so much about Abraham by not having done anything. If Abraham had have gone that route, it would have been not just strange, but it would have been disturbing to them, and it should have been disturbing to us as well to read it there. And yet, today, I'll just boil it down to followers of Jesus Christ. I'm not sure that followers of Jesus Christ have a stereotype of being hospitable people like Abraham is here. In fact, I think in a lot of ways we might have the opposite of that. There's this discussion going on my Facebook wall right now about whether or not Christians after church on Sunday are equally annoying as guests in restaurants to waiters and waitresses, or whether or not they're far worse in rudeness, self-importance, not leaving adequate tips, and the way that they treat waiters and waitresses on Sundays after church. And I think, it's interesting to read those comments, because oftentimes the stereotype is reality and the perception is reality. And for a lot of people, Christians are, in fact, indeed, the rudest and most inhospitable, unloving, self-centered people on the planet. That isn't true of all Christians, but it's at least true, sadly, of enough of us that there's a stereotype. And oftentimes that stereotype is based in reality. And so it's worrisome to me that it isn't the opposite. I think on the basis of passages like this, for me, it's strange, and it should disturb us that Christians are not seen and viewed as being anymore the most hospitable people, going far above and beyond in our giving to others. And we don't think it's strange. We don't think twice about it. We should. And where does change begin? Change begins with us. Change begins with us acting differently. Abraham goes far beyond the customary expectations. We've said that as well. But it's interesting that you never know who you might be entertaining at your table. You never know who may be there. Abraham didn't know who it was, but I would say that actually you do know who's at your table. It's God every time, even if it's not God. I think Abraham treated everybody who came to his tent, everybody who came to his table, as though not just they were important, but as though they were God, as though they were a messenger of God, which is essentially the definition of angel. He treated everybody that way. And I think God is represented. The light of God is represented in each and every one of the people whom we come in contact with, and each and every one of the people whom we do or do not invite to our table. Every face you look into, honestly, I would say, is God's face, which makes it even more strange and disturbing whenever we don't treat people with a level of hospitality that is the bare minimum, let alone, as Abraham does, far beyond. Abraham undersells and over-delivers. It's very interesting to me that if you read, now I've read out of the New Living Translation, so it says something like Abraham offers them a bit of food, or something like that. The text says, rest in the shade of this tree, and since your honor, let me prepare some food to refresh you on the journey. But what the text actually says in the original is basically just a few cakes and a few morsels in order to feed you. Abraham knew in his mind that he was going to kill a calf in order to feed these people. But if he had done and said that in the beginning, they might have said, no, that's way too much. Abraham doesn't give them the choice. Abraham undersells. Well, come over, I'll whip up something small. And then they show up, It's like a 13-course meal. 5-star, 6-star. I think there's something to be said for that. Followers of Jesus Christ, anything to do with hospitality, we should be the type of people who are over-delivering. We're over-delivering on expectations. Why? Because, right or wrong, everything that we say and everything that we do also tells people something about our God. They're judging him by us. So we should be people who enjoy good hospitality. We should be people who are inviting others over, who are treating others like kings or like the king. Underselling, but always over-delivering. And in the case of Abraham, if you read his whole story, when he lives this way, it makes all the difference in the world and in his world. And I believe that it will in yours as well. Until tomorrow.